We have made it. Day 50 of 100, officially the halfway mark. I'm so excited to be here. Today was a big day for me, not just because it's the 50th day in this challenge, but also because I finally was able to unveil and release the little article that I've been working on to kind of share my experiences on this journey thus far, 50 days in and all. And I'm really excited for that because it's published now on Medium, and I've also shared it to Dev.to, which is pretty cool. And I'm most likely going to approach FreeCodeCamp themselves and see if I can get my article published on FreeCodeCamp, because I mean I owe it to them for the majority of the progress that I've made this far. So that's pretty exciting, and I'm really happy for that. But other than that, yeah, it's a new week. I can put that behind me because it's like hundreds and thousands of words that is just done. It's done. It's out of the way. Can relax now, and I can just focus on my studies. There's nothing major or big planned. So let us continue with React. We are checking out how to use state to toggle an element. You can use state in React applications in more complex ways than what you've seen so far. One example is to monitor the status of a value, then render the UI conditionally based on this value. There are several different ways to accomplish this, and the code editor shows one method. So my component has a visibility property which is initialized to false. The render method returns one view if the view of visibility is true, and a different view if it is false. Currently there is no way of updating the visibility property in the component state. The value should toggle back and forth between true and false. There is a click handler on the button which triggers a class method called toggle visibility. Define this method so the state of visibility toggles to the opposite value when the method is called. If visibility is false, the method sets it to true, and vice versa. And finally, click the button to see the conditional rendering of the component based on its set. Okay. We've already got some code that we worked on a bit yesterday. And we've set this .toggle visibility. And then we've got our function toggle visibility. We're just gonna have something like an if this dot state dot visibility. So if it's true, then we'll just set this dot state dot. I wonder if we can do it like this way. Oh no, we can't do this dot state. We need to use set state, don't we? How do we use set state again? It's been a while. Let's jump to, oopsie. Let's jump to set state. Is that how we did it before? I'm trying to remember now. Oh, there it is, yeah. So this dot set state, and then the state, and then the value. So it's something like this, and then inside there, it's going to be visibility. So if it's true, turn it to false. And that's all we want to do. Now let's see if that works. No, not quite. There it is. Let's think about this one for a moment. Slightly tricky one, huh? There's no way of updating. Okay, so toggle. Wait, where does toggle button on click this dot toggle visibility? If this dot state. If it's visible, you see the now you see me. Since it starts false, I guess we should switch it to that. There we go. Okay, so it toggles it. Then we still need an else. Actually, I don't need to do it that way. I just add. I forgot. We're just missing the else. That's all. So we just set this to true. It's one or the other. So, hey, there we go. We got it working. And that's everything. Write a simple counter. You can design a more complex stateful component by combining the concepts covered so far. These include initializing state, writing methods that set state, and assigning click handlers to trigger these methods. The counter component keeps track of a count value in a state. There are two buttons which call methods increment and decrement. Write these methods so the counter value is incremented or decremented by 1 when the appropriate button is clicked. Also create a reset button so when the reset button is clicked, a reset method. So when the reset button is clicked, the count is set to 0. Note, make sure you don't modify the class names of the buttons. Also remember to add the necessary bindings for the newly created methods in the constructor. So this is where we're going to have to create the bindings for the methods that we create. And this is where we're going to have to do the methods themselves. So we need increment. We need decrement. And we need reset. And I think it was this dot increment dot bind this. No, that wasn't it. I had to set it to... Look at Virani's notes. Yeah, that came in handy last night. And let's go to the part on... What was it? Bind? Right, the method. You have to... so it's this dot method dot bind this. Okay, so it's this dot method needs to equal this dot increment, this dot method dot bind this. So that's what we're going to need for each one. We need decrement as well, and we need it for reset. So if you... So all we're literally doing is we call set state, don't we? This dot set state count. Do we do count plus equal to 1? Oh, hold on. Do we do plus 1? What will that do? Let's find out. How do we... the value to change? That's gonna set it to 1. And if I do plus plus, that's not valid. I feel we covered this before, but I've forgotten now, haven't I? Because it's not the same as accessing the variable. And I mean, I can store the variable and then just add plus 1 to it, but isn't there a better way? Or can you not? See what happens if I console log it. It's 0. It's 1. Yeah, okay, there we go. I just don't want to do it this way. I feel there's a better way of doing it. But anyway, you would basically do val plus equal to 1. So then it would take the value. But we didn't do it this way yesterday, did we? We did something else. Let me see if I can go back a few lessons. It was also with a counter. It wasn't too far back. Oh, there you go. They literally just did this dot state dot item count plus 1. So the same as a variable. And then we don't need that. We'll write it like this if we want it to be a bit neater. Will that work still? Yeah, that works. So then we're gonna do the exact same for decrement. But decrement is literally -1. Uh-oh, it goes negative, but they didn't specify that we have to handle that, so... And then reset is just setting the count to 0. Increment, decrement, reset. Perfect. Wow. That's pretty cool. We use set state. Get the property that's on state. We do this dot state count plus 1, and obviously it evaluates that at that time. That's so cool. Do we pass? Yes, we do. Create a controlled input. Your application may have more complex interactions between state and the rendered UI. For example, form control elements for text input, such as input and text area, maintain their own state in a DOM as the user types. With React, you can move this mutable state into a React component's state. The user's input becomes part of the application state, so React controls the value of that input field. Typically, if you have React components with input fields the user can type into, it will be a controlled input form. The code editor has a skeleton of a component called controlled input to create a controlled input element. The component's state is already initialized with an input property that holds an empty string. This value represents the text a user types into the input field. First, create a method called handleChange that has a parameter called event. Okay, yeah, we're gonna have to do that. And we're gonna have to probably bind it again. To create a method called handleChange. So handleChange, yeah, handleChange. And then here we're gonna have to bind it. So it's this dot handleChange equal to this dot handleChange dot bind this. And then is handleChange called? It has a parameter called event. When the method is called, it receives an event object that contains a string of text from the input element. You can access the string with event.target.value inside the method. Update the input property of the component state, this new string. Create the input, probably do that, in the render method. Right, first create a method called handleChange that has a property called event. That has a parameter called event. Oh, okay. Event. When the method is called, it receives an event object that contains a string of text from the input element. You can access the string with event.target.value inside the method. Update the input property. Oh, the input property. Okay, so this dot set state input becomes event.target.value. That should be it. And then in the render method, create the input element above the h4 tag, so over here, and add the input and add a value attribute. How do we do value again? Which is equal to the input property, a component state. Equal to the input. That doesn't make sense because the p tag does the same thing. Add a value attribute which is equal to the input property of the component state. Which component state? That one, yeah. Hold on. Oh, and you need a closing tag, don't you? For each opening you need a closing. Confusing. In the render method that's here, create the input element above the h4 tag, which is that. Add a value attribute which is equal to the input property, which is equal to the input property of the component state. So it's that. Now how do we add a attribute. Oh, there you go. Okay, that worked. When you type in the input box, that text is processed by the handle change method, set as the input property in the local state, and rendered as the value in the input box on the page. If I type... Wait, I can't type in it. When you type in the input box, that text is processed by the handle change method set as the input property in the local state and rendered as the value in the input box on the page. The component state is a single source of truth regarding the input data. Is that the point, that I can't type anything? It's controlled. But then why have an input if you expect user input but can't change it? Because if I add testing there, or show testing in there, and testing in the controlled input, I'm a bit lost. Do we pass? Okay, thank God we don't pass. Typing in the input element should update the state and the value of the input, and the p element should render the state as you type. Oh, we forgot the on change, didn't we? On change. Wait, it's not on change. It's yeah, it is camel case. On change equal to handle change, I guess. And then we need JSX. Oh, no. It's not like that, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's not. Should be on change equal to let's see what we're missing here. Lowercase? Is on change. On change. Do I have to do this? That on change? Is that the issue? Oh no, that's on change. I mean this. But there you go. Oh. Now it works. Controlled input. Hello world. So it's a controlled input because I could see exactly. It's odd. I'm trying to understand why would need that, but yeah, we did that. Look at us go. Woohoo! Hey Lev, how's it going? It's been a while that I've seen you. We're on to React now. A little bit different to last time we saw each other, huh? Okay, so... Okay, sorry. Back. We need to move on to the next section. Let me just update this real quick. Where are we? Hey. Yeah, can't wait when you learn all this dirty front end and move on to security. That'll be fun, huh? So we need to create a controlled form. The last challenge showed that React can control the internal state for certain elements like input and text area, which makes them controlled components. This applies to other form elements as well, including the regular HTML form element. I'm trying to understand like the whole idea behind controlled components. Like, why is it called a controlled component? You had an input, you typed into it, and then it called a function which changed the value in that state, but then also updated that value somewhere else. Anyway, the myForm component is set up with an empty form with a submit handler. The submit handler will be called when the form is submitted. We've added a button which submits the form. You can see it has the type set to submit, indicating it is the button controlling the form. Add the input element in the form and set its value and onChange attributes like the last challenge. You should then complete the handle submit method so that it sets the component state property submit to the current input value in the local state. What are my feelings on front-end libraries compared to plain programming languages? I guess it's still a bit too early to really weigh in on that, but I mean, from what I've seen, React makes things like a whole lot easier. At least for the rendering to the DOM side of things and manipulating the data, it's so much easier to work with. And I mean, you could, you know, set up helper functions and stuff to get the same kind of effect. So I'll just have to look at the pros and cons of using a library and, I don't know, things like resource usage and whatever else. Obviously it's overhead, it's something on top of the native language. But I have to really see, but it makes things easier. But, you know, I'm always a fan of doing things the long way and the original way so you can actually learn and know why things work the way they do. Otherwise you've got a few people that, you know, truly know the language and then everyone else is just using a watered down version. So all that really does is, you know, take away from the problem solving aspect. For me at least. Does it mean MVC by using controller? Where does it say controller? Say controller somewhere? I don't see a controller anywhere. I have no idea. I have no idea what MVC is. Okay, so what's the first thing we need to do? Add the input element in the form. So we don't have an input element. So we need input and set its value to... Okay, so its value is going to be this dot state dot... Is this for input? Yeah. Dot input and on change is going to be the method that we create, which is handle change. This dot handle change. So that's our input right there. You thought I was puzzled by the usage of the word controller? Was I? I was more confused with controlled. Sorry, that's probably what you meant. Controlled state. Oh no! I clicked away by accident. Luckily we didn't get too far. So it was input value is equal to this dot state dot input. What else? On change equal to this dot handle change. So that's the input again. Nothing updates yet. We need a bind. Oh, we already got bind. Cool, so that's done. You should then complete the handle submit method so that it sets the component state property submit to the current input value in the local state. The handle submit needs to be, so this dot set state submit is equal to this dot state dot input. Can we just do that? Note, you must also call event.preventDefault in the submit handler to prevent the default form submit behavior, which will refresh the web page. Okay. So we're going to prevent default, and then we're going to update the value. Finally, create an h1 tag after the form, which renders the submit value. Okay, so that should be this dot state dot submit. Testing, click submit. We get testing, yay! That's kind of cool. I like React for that. Like, it takes a little bit of extra setting up, but once you set it up, the cool thing about React is you don't have to go and specifically declare anything or find the element that the item is in. You literally just create a module and you set the value to whatever, let's say if it's in a state. And all you're doing is updating that state. So every time React detects a change, it just dynamically updates the DOM, which is really cool. Oh, check out MVC sometime. Thanks, Lev. I think we passed. Think we're good? Yeah, we're good. We are good. Now we need to pass state as props to child components. Ooh, this is a big one. So wall of text. You saw a lot of examples that pass props to child JSX elements and child React components in previous challenges. You may be wondering where those props came from. A common pattern is to have a stateful component containing the state important to your app that then renders child components. You want these components to have access to some pieces of that state, which are passed in as props. For example, maybe you have an app component that renders a navbar, among other components. In your app, you have state that contains a lot of user information, but the navbar only needs access to the user's username so it can display it. You pass that piece of state to the navbar component as a prop. Oh. This pattern illustrates some important paradigms in React. The first is unidirectional data flow. State flows in one direction down the tree of your application's components from the stateful parent component to child components. The child components only receive the state data they need. The second is that complex stateful apps can be broken down into just a few or maybe a single stateful component. The rest of your components simply receive state from the parent as props, and render a UI from that state. It begins to create a separation where state management is handled in one part of code and UI rendering in another. This principle of separating state logic from UI logic is one of React's key principles. When it's used correctly, it makes the design of complex stateful applications much easier to manage. The MyApp component is stateful and renders a navbar as a child. It renders, yeah, navbar. Pass the name property in its state down to the child component. Then show the name in the h1 tag that's part of the navbar rendered method. So we need to pass a property. This needs to change to this.state.name. Didn't it? Oh wait, this is outside of it now, isn't it? Reminds me of my old times at mobile development. Nice, we're using React with mobile development. This is a separate class, so I can't go this, because this refers to that. So I have to go MyApp, don't I? .state. I can't do this .state.name, can I? Why did I think... And I can't do MyApp.name. Ooh, gotta rethink that one. Oh wait, that's a prop. It gets passed down. So we have to do props. Gotta look up props again. This is why I can't wait to build projects with React, because it's like you forget here and there. How do you pass it? Rendering? It's not rendering. Did I miss? Because I can get this here. Because we can just do this.name, this.state.name, but where... But isn't state... Okay, what is props? We gotta pass props, that's what I remember. I just gotta remember how you pass props again. Passing props. It wasn't that one. There was a specific way that we did it. I don't remember that way. That's setting it in a constant. Or was it? Maybe it was. Maybe it was. Pass the name. So name equal to... I'd be able to do this dot state dot name, something like that. And then I should be able to do props.name. Should be able to do props.name. Pass the name property in its state down to the child component, which is this. We've done that though, haven't we? We gave it a prop name is equal to... You gonna go sleep, Lev? Alright, hope you sleep well. Thanks for dropping by. Maybe I'll catch you again when I stream a little bit earlier. Appreciate it. Wait. Props is not defined. On which line? Can only be here. The navbar takes props. What am I missing? Where's props? Hold on, we got Varani's one as well. State, there's props, there we go. Passing in props to a component. Props are immutable. It has to be this dot props and then whatever the prop name is. So this. I was just missing the this. Oh my god. I was missing the this dot props dot name. Bob. Hello, my name is Bob. That's so cool. There we go. Pass a callback as props. You can pass state as props to child components, but you're not limited to passing data. You can also pass handler functions or any method that's defined on a React component to a child component. This is how you allow child components to interact with their parent components. You pass methods to a child just like a regular prop. It's assigned a name, and you have access to that method name under this.props in the child component. There are three components outlined in the code editor. The MyApp component is the parent that will render the getInput and renderInput child components. Add the getInput component to the render method in MyApp. Okay, so we need to add which component? Add the getInput. So getInput. Then pass it a prop called input. Input equal to assigned to input value from my app state. This dot state dot input value. Okay. Also create a prop called handle change and pass the input handler handle change to it. Handle change. Oh, that's cool. So it's almost similar as the input we did earlier, but now we're passing props to it. Oh, I forgot about closing this one. Next, add render input to the render method in my app. Render input. Is that what you wanted me to? Oh, inside the div though. Hold on. There we go. Then create a prop called input. Okay. And pass the input value from state to it. Once you are finished, you will be able to type in the input field in the getInput component, which then calls the handler method in its parent via props. This updates the input in the state of the parent, which is passed as props to both children. Observe how the data flows between the components and how the single source of truth remains the state of the parent component. Admittedly, this example is a bit contrived, but should serve to illustrate how data and callbacks can be passed between React components. Alright, so you have basically a single variable for one place to change whatever is happening, essentially. So if I put there Marge, it will have Marge in it. And as I change that, because that's, well, the default value. That's so cool. So you change it in one place and you can display it in however many places you want. And it's like live. Wow. That's cool. Ooh. Use the lifecycle method component will mount. React components have several special methods that provide opportunities to perform actions at specific points in the lifecycle of a component. These are called lifecycle methods or lifecycle hooks and allow you to catch components at certain points in time. This can be before they are rendered, before they update, before they receive props, before they unmount, and so on. Here's a list of some of the main lifecycle. Oh, that's cool. So before you even like display something, you could do like a quick check or something. Huh. Component will mount, component did mount, component will receive props, should component update, component will update, component did update, component will unmount. The next several lessons will cover some of the basic use cases for these lifecycle methods. The component will mount method is called before the render method when a component is being mounted to the DOM. So then we're going to be working on lifecycle method. Okay. So here the component called log something to the console within component will mount. You may want to have your browser console open to see the output. Oh. So it will mount. Will mount being... It's called before the render method. Huh. Use the lifecycle method component did mount. Most web developers at some point need to call an API endpoint to retrieve data. If you're working with React, it's important to know where to perform this action. The best practice with React is to place API calls or any calls to your server in the lifecycle method component did mount. This method is called after a component is mounted to the DOM. Any calls to setState here will trigger a re-rendering of your component. When you call an API in this method and set your state the data that the API returns, it will automatically trigger an update once you receive the data. There is a mock API call in component did mount. It sets state after 2.5 seconds to simulate calling a server to retrieve data. This example requests the current total active users for a site. In the render method, render the value of active users in the H1. Watch what happens in the preview, and feel free to change the timeout to see the different effects. And I know what's going to happen. This.state.active users. After a few seconds. Wow. You call your API, and when that API has something, we update the value. That's so cool. I wonder why that's not a thing by default. I guess, yeah, so you gotta remember these things. Hold on. The component did mount. The component did mount method is also the best place to attach any event listeners you need to add for specific function. Okay, so this is almost like on-page load, on body load, or whatever it was, that method that checks that everything is loaded. It's essentially that's what it is, right? React provides a synthetic event system which wraps the native event system present in browsers. This means that the synthetic event system behaves exactly the same regardless of the user's browser, even if the native events may behave differently between different browsers. Oh, ew. That's cool. So you have like one central... Okay, see why that's cool. You've already been using some of these synthetic event handlers, such as onClick. React's synthetic event system is great to use for most interactions you will manage on DOM elements. However, if you want to attach an event handler to the document or window objects, you have to do this directly. Attach an event listener in the component did mount method for key down events, and have these events trigger the callback handle key press. You can use document.addEventListener, which takes the event in quotes as the first argument and the callback as the second argument. Attach an event listener in the component did mount. So document.addEventListener, and then we're gonna want key down. And then we want to do handle key press. Then in component will unmount, remove the same event listener. You can pass the same arguments. Document.remove event listener. It's good practice to use this lifecycle method to do any cleanup on React components before they are unmounted and destroyed. What? Removing event listeners is an example of one such cleanup action. Why isn't there like an automatic cleanup? That could be cool, right? Could create one, I'm thinking. Someone's probably done that. Oh, maybe it exists. Find out. But I don't think it's working yet. Because of this. Oh no, it was. Right, do I need... I always get confused. Add event listener, do you need the parameters? No. It's just handle key press. Okay, and then component unmount will apparently be the exact same. Except for add, it's remove event listener, key down, handle key press. Oh, but nothing's actually happening here. Renders this.state.message. But this only seems to be checking for the enter key. Handle key press is not defined. Okay. Oh, this. Getting this, I'm gonna have to get used to this. Press the enter key! There we go. Updates with lifecycle methods. Another lifecycle method is component will receive props, which is called whenever a component is receiving new props. This method receives the new props as an argument, which is usually written as next props. You can use this argument and compare with this props and perform actions before the component updates. For example, you may call setState locally before the update is processed. Another method is component did update and is called immediately after a component re-renders. Note that rendering and mounting are considered different things in a component lifecycle. When a page first loads, all components are mounted, and this is where methods like component will mount and component did mount are called. After this, as state changes, components re-render themselves. The next challenge covers this in more detail. The child component dialog receives message props from its parent, the controller component. Write the component will receive props method in the dialog component. And have it log this.props and next props to the console. So console.log this.props and this dot next props. Where's next props though? You'll need to pass next props as an argument to this method. Next, add component did update in the dialog component. Component did update. And log a statement that says the component has updated. The component has updated. This method works similarly to component war update, which is provided for you. Now click the button to change the message and watch your browser console. The order of the console statements show the order the methods are called. Okay, see what happens. Might have an error. Or not. Component is about to update. The component has updated. That was fast. Yeah, obviously, I mean, it won't take that long. The more complex things might, but... Note, you'll need to write the lifecycle methods as normal functions and not as arrow functions to pass the tests. There is also no advantage to writing lifecycle methods as arrow functions. Okay. And there we go. We are done. And with that being said, we are also done with the stream for today. It's been an hour. It's been a very long day, and I just really want to get this challenge in because I've been doing studies. I've also been doing the writing for the article that I wrote that I published on Medium. So it's been a really long day for me right now. I could feel my concentration slipping slightly, and I don't want to pass up on React. I want to be able to focus fully. Although, that being said, this is the last lifecycle method, so we might as well finish that up. Then all we're left with is a few other things to do. So let's finish that lifecycle method and then we'll be done. So far, if any component receives new state or new props, it re-renders itself and all its children. This is usually okay, but React provides a lifecycle method you can call when child components receive new state or props, and declares specifically if the component should update or not. The method is shouldComponentUpdate, and it takes next props and next state as parameters. This method is also a useful way to optimize performance. For example, the default behavior is that your component re-renders when it receives new props, even if the props haven't changed. You can use shouldComponentUpdate to prevent this by comparing the props. The method should return a boolean value that tells React whether or not to update the component. You can compare the current props, this.props, to the next props, to determine if you need to update or not, and return true or false accordingly. The shouldComponentUpdate method is added in a component called onlyEvens. Currently this method returns true, so onlyEvens renders every time it receives new props. Modify the method so onlyEvens updates only if the value of its new props is even. Click the add button and watch the order of the events in your browser's console as the other lifecycle hooks are triggered. So if this.props is equal to next props, if not, you just do an if not, right? Then return true. How about that? Does that work? So it doesn't do anything. Wow. The onlyEvens component should return an h1 tag which renders the value of this.props.value. OnlyEvens should re-render only when next props.value is even. Oh, if it is even. Isn't it next state that we should be comparing to? Because there's also next state. No, it's not that either. The should component update method is added in a component called onlyEvens. Currently, this method returns true, so onlyEven re-renders every time it receives new props. Modify the method so onlyEven updates only if the value of its new props is even. So if I do nothing, so only if it's even. Wait, are you literally saying that I should do something like if next props hold on, I want to see what next props is, just so I can see if I got this right. Ah. Okay, so we do if next props dot value if it's modulo 2, I think, will return onlyEvens, if I'm not mistaken. That's odds. Oh. I said odds now, I'm trying to think. Oh, modulo 0 with nothing remaining. Oh, what am I trying to do? Modulo 2 is... if you had 2, modulo 2, it would be 0. Which would be true. Oh, that would be false. Not. Wait, what am I trying to do? You get 1, and then 3, starts 5, 6 is skipped. Seven modulo 2 is 1. And that's if true, return true, that's why. It should be not though. Why can't I do not? If not props.value modulo 2. So if it's false. I'm not getting the logic right. I have to wrap that up. There you go. So it only updates when it's even. Only when the next props.value is even. I think we did it. Yay! I don't even know if that was the correct solution to use, but it worked. Wow, okay, yeah. I'm gonna need some rest, guys, but we'll continue with this tomorrow. Seems we're going to do some inline styles in React and a few other fun React things. But that we're going to pick up tomorrow. So until then, bye for now.